Did she just drop her champagne? How mortifying. Poor Julian. The champagne flute shattered against Italian marble, and every head in the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom turned to stare at the black woman in the simple emerald dress standing next to Julian Sterling, the richest tech mogul in New York City. Did she just drop her champagne? Someone whispered loud enough for 3 tables to hear. How mortifying. Poor Julian. But Naomi Chen didn't bend to pick up the glass. She didn't stammer an apology. She just smiled, calm, knowing, because she understood something they didn't. Something that would shatter their world in exactly 14 minutes. Before we start the story, subscribe and comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. 3 months earlier, Julian Sterling had done the unthinkable. He married a woman no one in his circle had ever heard of. No debutante ball. No trust fund. No surname that opened doors. Just Naomi, a quiet community librarian from the Bronx who took the subway to work and still shopped at Target. The media exploded across every gossip column and business tabloid. How could a billionaire marry someone so ordinary? The wedding had been small. Too small for someone of Julian's status. His business partners attended out of obligation, their smiles tight and their gifts expensive but impersonal. His mother had sent flowers but declined to come, citing prior commitments. And the press had a field day, calling Naomi everything from a social climber to Julian's midlife crisis experiment. One headline read, "Silicon Valley billionaire marries nobody. Julian Sterling's surprising choice." But Julian didn't care what they said. He had fallen in love with Naomi the moment she challenged his assumptions about education access in her library. He had walked in researching a foundation project, and she had handed him 3 books he'd never heard of, then proceeded to discuss linguistic barriers in technology in flawless academic English, casual Spanish, and conversational Mandarin, all in the span of 10 minutes. He had never met anyone like her. "Why do you work here?" He'd asked that first day, genuinely curious. "Because knowledge shouldn't cost a fortune," she said simply. "And I like watching people discover they're smarter than the world told them they were." He came back the next week. Then the week after. Eventually, he asked her to dinner. She said yes, but only if he promised not to talk about venture capital or stock portfolios. He agreed. And for the first time in his adult life, Julian Sterling had a conversation that didn't revolve around valuations, market disruption, or hostile takeovers. 6 months later, he proposed in the reading room of her library, the same place they'd met, surrounded by books that had cost nothing but meant everything. She said yes. And the world lost its mind. Now, 3 months into their marriage, Naomi stood in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel for the annual Sterling Foundation Gala. It was the social event of the season. Old money, new tech fortunes, politicians, cultural icons. Everyone who mattered was there. And they were all staring at her. "Is that what she's wearing?" A woman dripping in Cartier whispered to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "I wouldn't be caught dead in something so simple." Naomi's dress was elegant emerald silk, beautiful but not couture. No borrowed jewels. No designer label visible. Just her wedding ring and pearl earrings her mother had given her. She looked stunning. But she didn't look like she belonged. At least, that's what they thought. Julian squeezed her hand gently. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Naomi said. But her pulse was racing. She had known this night would be brutal. Julian had warned her his world was ruthless. But she had agreed to come anyway, because she loved him and because she had something to prove. Not to them. To herself. 6 months earlier, Julian Sterling had walked into the Bronx Community Library with a specific mission and zero expectations of having his life changed. He was researching education access for the Sterling Foundation's new initiative, armed with demographic data and consultant reports that all said the same sanitized things about underserved communities and achievement gaps. The library smelled like old books and possibility. Behind the reference desk sat a woman with natural hair pulled into a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, completely absorbed in a book. "Excuse me," Julian said. "I'm looking for information about ESL programs in the area." She looked up, dark eyes intelligent and assessing. "For yourself or for research?" "Research. I'm Julian Sterling." She closed her book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. "I know who you are. Your foundation funds the after-school program downstairs." She stood extending her hand. "Naomi Chen. I run the adult ESL classes here." Her handshake was firm, confident. She didn't seem impressed by his name or his net worth, which was so refreshing it nearly knocked him off balance. "I'd love to talk to you about linguistic barriers in technology," he said. "If you have time." She checked the clock. "I have about 20 minutes before my next class." They talked for 4 hours. Naomi didn't just understand education theory. She lived it. She talked about code switching, about how her students navigated 3 languages daily just to survive. She discussed the violence of assuming intelligence correlates with English fluency. She quoted Chomsky and Gloria Anzaldúa and her own grandmother with equal reverence. Julian forgot about his consultant reports. He just listened to this woman dismantle every assumption he'd brought into the building. "You're self-taught?" he asked, stunned. "Library card and determination," she said simply. "French from audiobooks on my subway commute. Italian from cooking shows. Spanish from my students. German from online courses. Mandarin from my father." She smiled. "You don't need Yale to learn. You just need to want it badly enough." He came back the following Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. Soon he was showing up on Thursdays too, sitting in the back of her ESL class, watching her teach with patience and brilliance and genuine love for her students. They started having dinner after her classes. Nothing fancy. Her favorite Dominican spot on 149th Street where the mofongo was perfect and nobody cared who he was. They talked about everything except money. She made him laugh. She challenged him. She saw past the Forbes profile to the person underneath. 3 months in, Julian realized he was in love. He proposed on a Thursday evening in the library's reading room, the same place they'd met. No photographer. No elaborate setup. Just him, Naomi, and the question that mattered. "I know this is crazy," he said, kneeling between stacks of books. "I know we're from different worlds. But I don't want to live in my world without you in it. Naomi Chen, will you marry me?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Yes. But I'm keeping my library job. I wouldn't dream of asking you to quit." They married 3 weeks later. City Hall. Naomi's parents and her best friend. Julian's assistant as a witness. Simple. Perfect. Real. The media found out within hours. Billionaire's Bride, from the Bronx to the boardroom, screamed one headline. Tech mogul's midlife crisis. A love story or gold digger alert. Society columnists questioned Naomi's motives. Social media exploded with strangers dissecting her worth. Julian's mother called once. "You've made a terrible mistake," she said coldly. "That woman will ruin everything you've built." He hung up. But Julian didn't care. He'd spent 38 years in rooms full of people who only saw his net worth. Naomi saw him. And that was worth more than every opinion in Manhattan combined. Naomi Chen learned her first language before she could walk. Jamaican patois, lilting and musical, flowing from her mother's mouth as she rocked her to sleep after double shifts at the nursing home. English came next, formal and careful. Then Mandarin, her father's gift, whispered between orders at the restaurant where he worked. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. Naomi slept on a pull-out couch in the living room until she was 12. Her mother worked as a home health aide, 60 hours a week. Her father worked 2 jobs, the restaurant during dinner service, overnight security at an office building. Between them, they barely kept the lights on. But they kept the library card active. At 7 years old, Naomi discovered the Bronx Community Library 3 blocks from their apartment. It became her sanctuary. While other kids played outside, she sat cross-legged between the stacks, drowning in worlds bigger than her zip code. She taught herself French at 15 from audiobooks she'd load onto a donated iPod, listening during her hour-long subway commute to the high school in Manhattan. Italian came from her grandmother, who'd watch cooking shows while Naomi absorbed the language like sunlight. Spanish was survival. Her neighbors, her friends, the bodega owner who'd slip her free mangoes when her parents couldn't afford groceries. German she taught herself at 23, taking free online courses after her shifts at the library, staying up until 2 in the morning conjugating verbs while exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. Mandarin she already knew, but she deepened it. Reading her father's old books, watching Chinese films, speaking to elderly patrons who lit up when she greeted them in their mother tongue. She built a master's-level understanding of linguistics and education theory entirely on her own. Not from Harvard. Not from Yale. From public libraries and free internet and the stubborn belief that intelligence didn't require tuition. She learned because learning was oxygen. Because every new language was a key to someone else's world. Because she refused to accept that poverty meant ignorance. Her mother once asked, "Why do you work so hard at this, baby? Who are you trying to impress?" "No one, Mama," Naomi said. "I'm just trying to understand." And then she met Julian. For the first time in her life, someone looked at her brilliance and didn't seem surprised. He listened to her thoughts on linguistic imperialism like they mattered. He asked her opinion on education policy like she was the expert. Because she was. "You could be teaching at Columbia," he'd said one night over dinner. "I could," she agreed. "But I'd rather teach Mrs. Rodriguez how to help her daughter with English homework. That matters more to me than a faculty position." Julian had looked at her like she'd just solved an equation no one else could see. "You're extraordinary," he said. "No," Naomi corrected gently. "I'm just what happens when someone poor gets access to knowledge. Imagine what the world would look like if everyone did." That's when he knew he wanted to marry her. Not because she was extraordinary despite her background, but because her background had made her exactly who she was. The emerald dress hung in Naomi's closet like a question she hadn't answered yet. Julian had offered to hire a stylist, send her to Bergdorf's, give her access to designers. "Whatever makes you comfortable," he'd said. But Naomi had chosen this dress herself. From Nordstrom. On sale. $300 she'd saved from her own paycheck because she refused to use Julian's money for armor she didn't need. It was beautiful. Simple silk, elegant lines, nothing flashy. It was her. "You don't have to go," Julian said the morning of the gala. I can make an excuse. I'm going. She turned to him, her voice steady. I'm your wife. I belong there because you belong there. They'll be cruel, he warned. These people measure worth in stock portfolios and family trees. Naomi took his face in her hands. Baby, I've been dealing with people who don't see me my entire life. I'll survive a dinner party. That evening, they arrived at the Plaza Hotel. The red carpet stretched before them, photographers already positioned. The moment Naomi stepped out, camera flashes exploded. Mrs. Sterling, who are you wearing? How does it feel to be married to a billionaire? Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast golden light over 200 guests dressed in wealth she couldn't fathom. Every head turned when they entered. The whispers started immediately. That's her. Is that dress off the rack? Poor Julian. He looks miserable. But Julian didn't look miserable. He looked proud, his hand firm on the small of her back. Then she appeared. Victoria Ashfordson. Platinum blonde, razor-sharp cheekbones, wearing a red Valentino gown. She'd been Julian's fiancée once, back when his life made sense to people like her. Julian, darling. Victoria air-kissed both his cheeks. Then her eyes slid to Naomi. And this must be the famous Mrs. Sterling. Naomi, Julian said firmly. Of course. Victoria's smile could cut glass. Naomi, darling, you look comfortable. How refreshing. So many women overdress for these things. You're clearly not trying to impress anyone. The words landed like a slap dressed as a compliment. Naomi smiled, her voice warm. I'm not. But thank you for noticing. Victoria's eyes flickered, surprised, maybe annoyed. Well, how delightfully authentic. She touched Julian's arm possessively. We should catch up later. She glided away, leaving her disdain hanging in the air. I'm sorry, Julian murmured. Don't be, Naomi said quietly. She's exactly who I expected. By the time they reached their table, Naomi had been assessed, dismissed, and judged by at least 50 pairs of eyes. The real ordeal hadn't even started yet. Dinner was served on plates that probably cost more than Naomi's monthly rent used to. Seared scallops with microgreens she couldn't name, arranged like tiny works of art. Naomi was seated between Preston Whitmore, investment banker, Julian's college roommate, and Margot Vanderberg, society columnist who'd written 3 pieces questioning Julian's judgment. Preston turned to her first, his smile polite but his eyes cold. So, Naomi, you're a librarian. How quaint. Community librarian, she corrected gently. I also run ESL programs. How noble. Margot leaned in. Tell us, dear, what exactly attracted you to Julian? I'm sure it wasn't his charming personality. She laughed at her own joke. Laughter rippled down the table. Julian, seated 3 chairs away, went rigid. Naomi set down her fork carefully. I was attracted to his vision for accessible education. We share that passion. How sweet. Preston exclaimed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A shared passion for his money. That must make the marriage very comfortable. More laughter. The kind that invited others to join in the sport of humiliating the woman who didn't belong. Naomi smiled, took a sip of water, and said nothing. I mean, really, Margot continued. We're all adults here. You must have known what you were getting into. Marrying someone like Julian comes with certain expectations, standards. Her eyes traveled over Naomi's dress, her simple jewelry. One wonders if you're quite prepared for this world. I wonder that too sometimes, Naomi said quietly. The honesty seemed to stun them. Then Preston laughed. Well, at least she's self-aware. That's more than most gold diggers manage. Julian's hand gripped his knife so hard his knuckles went white. Naomi caught his eye and shook her head slightly. Don't. I'm okay. But she wasn't okay. Every word was a paper cut, small but accumulating. Then Victoria appeared behind Naomi's chair, champagne flute in hand. How's dinner, everyone? Preston, Margot, are you getting to know our dear Naomi? We're trying, Preston said. Though there's not much to know, is there? Librarian. Bronx. No family to speak of. It's all rather simple. Simple, Victoria repeated. She looked down at Naomi. You know what I find fascinating? Julian dated some of the most accomplished women in New York. Lawyers. Entrepreneurs. Women with pedigrees and potential. She paused. And then he married his librarian. The table went quiet. Even Preston looked uncomfortable. Victoria raised her champagne glass in a mock toast. To Naomi Sterling, who proved that fairy tales do come true. The glass slipped from her fingers. Or maybe she threw it. Either way, it shattered against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Every head in the ballroom turned. Oh, how clumsy of me, Victoria said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. I'm sorry. I just can't believe Julian Sterling married his librarian. The word librarian hung in the air like an accusation. Laughter erupted. Not polite chuckles, real, cruel laughter that echoed off the walls. 200 pairs of eyes fixed on Naomi, waiting. Would she cry? Would she fight back? Would she flee? Naomi did none of those things. She sat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, and smiled. Because she knew something they didn't. In 11 minutes, everything would change. The broken champagne glass was still being swept up when Julian Sterling rose from his seat. The room's attention shifted immediately. When the richest man in the room stands, everyone listens. Good evening, Julian said, his voice calm and commanding. Thank you all for being here tonight. The Sterling Foundation has always been committed to creating opportunity where systems have created barriers. Tonight, I'm honored to announce our most ambitious initiative yet. The room leaned forward. This was what they'd come for. The announcement. The Global Education Access Initiative, Julian continued, is a $500 million commitment to democratizing language education and literacy programs worldwide. Our goal is to build a free, world-class platform accessible to anyone with an internet connection. No tuition. No applications. No barriers. Polite applause. Heads nodding. But this initiative didn't come from a boardroom or a consulting firm, Julian said, his eyes finding Naomi. It was designed by someone who understands education access not as theory, but as lived experience. Someone who taught herself 5 languages without ever setting foot in a university classroom. Someone who knows firsthand what it means to be brilliant in a world that doesn't see you. The room went very still. I'd like to invite my wife, Naomi Chen, to share her vision with you. The silence was absolute. Naomi wasn't supposed to speak. This wasn't in the program. Preston Whitmore's fork clattered. Margot's mouth fell open. Victoria smiled, sharp and triumphant, certain she was about to witness the final humiliation. Julian extended his hand toward Naomi. Naomi. Every eye in the ballroom turned to her. The cameras swiveled. She's going to embarrass herself. This is going to be painful to watch. Naomi stood slowly. Her hands were shaking, but she pressed them flat against her thighs where no one could see. She walked past Preston, past Margot, past Victoria, whose smile said, "This is going to be delicious." Julian met her halfway, squeezed her hand briefly. "You've got this," and stepped aside. Naomi walked to the podium alone. The microphone stood like a challenge. In front of her, 200 faces. Skeptical, amused, waiting for her to fail. She gripped the sides of the podium, looked out at the crowd, found Julian's eyes, steady, believing. And then Naomi Chen began to speak. "Good evening," Naomi began, her voice quiet but steady. "My name is Naomi Chen, and I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in the Bronx." A ripple of whispers. She'd led with her poverty. How gauche. "My mother was a home health aide. My father worked 2 jobs, a restaurant and overnight security. Between them, they earned just enough to keep us fed and our lights on. We couldn't afford tutors or private schools or SAT prep courses." She paused. "But we had a library card." The whispers quieted. Something in her voice demanded attention. "When I was 7, I discovered the Bronx Community Library. It became my second home. My mother couldn't afford daycare, so after school, I'd sit between the stacks and teach myself everything the world said wasn't for people like me." She could see Victoria at table 5, arms crossed, waiting for this to fail. "I taught myself French from library audiobooks on my subway commute. Italian from cooking shows I watched with my grandmother. Spanish from my neighbors. German from free online courses I took after working full days. Mandarin from my father's bedtime stories." Her voice grew stronger. "Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because learning was the only thing that made sense in a world that told me I didn't belong." The room had gone completely still. The Sterling Foundation's Global Education Access Initiative was built on a simple belief: that brilliance has nothing to do with wealth, that intelligence isn't purchased with tuition, that a child in the Bronx or Lagos or Manila deserves the same access to knowledge as a child in Manhattan or Oxford. She gripped the podium tighter, her voice rising with conviction. "We're building a free, world-class platform for language education, cultural exchange, and literacy development, because I refuse to accept that poverty equals ignorance. I refuse to believe that the accident of your birth determines the limits of your mind. Knowledge is a human right. Dignity is a human right. And no one should have to prove they deserve either." The silence was deafening. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Naomi looked across the room to table 3, where Ambassador Philippe Dubois sat with his wife. She smiled, then switched languages like turning a key. "Monsieur l'ambassadeur, puis-je vous poser une question sur les programmes d'éducation en francophonie?" "Mr. Ambassador, may I ask you a question about education programs in francophone countries?" The ambassador's eyebrows shot up. Then he smiled, genuine, delighted, and responded in rapid French. "Bien sûr, Madame Sterling. Je serais honoré de discuter avec vous." "Of course, Mrs. Sterling. I would be honored." The conversation flowed like water. Naomi discussed Senegalese literacy programs, cited specific initiatives in Haiti, quoted M. Césaire on language and colonialism. 5 minutes of flawless, sophisticated French that held the room hostage. The gasps started at table 7 and spread like wildfire. Julian was frozen in his seat, watching his wife dismantle every assumption the room had made about her. Victoria's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. And Naomi, brilliant, unstoppable Naomi, wasn't even close to finished. The French conversation with Ambassador Du Bois ended with mutual laughter and a promise to collaborate. The room was still processing when Naomi turned to table 8. Monsignor Ricci, she said, addressing the Vatican's representative. Then she switched, her voice taking on the melodic rhythm of Italian. Could we discuss the importance of education in marginalized communities? Monsignor Ricci's eyes widened in delight. He responded in rapid Italian, and they dove into a discussion about Renaissance humanism, the preservation of ancient texts, and the Vatican Library's digitization efforts. Naomi quoted Dante, referenced Aquinas, discussed theology and art with the ease of someone who'd spent years in academia. She hadn't. She'd learned from library books and YouTube lectures and her own relentless curiosity. 5 minutes of flawless Italian. The room was transfixed. Before the applause could start, Naomi moved to table 12, where Ambassador Cardona of Colombia sat with his wife. Ambassador, I'd like to ask you about literacy programs in rural Colombia. They spoke in Spanish, not textbook Spanish, but the fluid, colloquial Spanish of someone who'd lived it. They debated Garcia Marquez and magical realism, discussed social justice in education, analyzed the barriers facing indigenous communities. Naomi's accent was flawless, her cultural references precise. Victoria's face had drained of all color. She sat frozen, her earlier triumph turned to ash. Naomi turned next to Klaus Hoffmann, the Swiss banker. Mr. Hoffmann, I would like to hear your perspective on economic development through education. German. Technical, precise, devastating. They discussed economic policy, development theory, the World Bank's failures in educational infrastructure. Naomi cited economists by name, referenced studies, demolished assumptions with surgical precision. Preston Whitmore excused himself from the table and disappeared toward the exit. He couldn't watch this anymore. Finally, Naomi approached table 4, where Li Wei, CEO of a Chinese AI company, sat with his delegation. Mr. Li, I'd like to discuss the ethical applications of AI in education. Mandarin. Tonal, nuanced, perfect. They spoke for 7 minutes about AI ethics, language preservation, the danger of technological imperialism. Li Wei was beaming, his colleagues nodding vigorously. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to Naomi. The same people who'd laughed at her were now rushing forward. Mrs. Sterling, I'd love to discuss partnership opportunities. Would you consider speaking at our foundation's event? Margot Vanderberg was typing frantically on her phone, no doubt rewriting tomorrow's column. But Naomi wasn't vindictive. She accepted their sudden respect with the same grace she'd accepted their cruelty. She smiled, shook hands, exchanged pleasantries. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply existed, fully and unapologetically herself. Julian appeared at her side. Ready to go home? She looked at him, exhausted but radiant. "Yes, please." As they walked out together, Julian whispered, "You were magnificent." "I was myself," Naomi corrected softly. That was enough. It always had been. By sunrise, Naomi's name was everywhere. Sterling's wife stuns Manhattan elite with 5 languages and global vision. New York Times. The librarian who silenced a ballroom. Washington Post. The videos went viral. Millions of views. comment sections overflowing with people who saw themselves in her story. This is what brilliance looks like when the system doesn't give you a shortcut. Julian's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from Victoria's husband, Marcus. "Julian, we need to talk about last night. Victoria is devastated. The Ashfordshire Foundation still wants to partner on the renewable energy project. $40 million is on the table." "The partnership is cancelled," Julian said. "Effective immediately." "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious. Goodbye, Marcus." He hung up. Preston Whitmore's resignation from the Sterling Foundation board arrived via email at 7:30 a.m. Julian accepted it and removed Preston's name from every committee within the hour. Margot Vanderberg's column appeared at 9 a.m. "I was wrong about Naomi Sterling, a mea culpa." The comments section tore her apart. "Too little, too late. You only apologized because she embarrassed you." Meanwhile, Naomi's phone was ringing off the hook. Social invitations flooded in. She declined them all. "I'm not interested in their validation," she told Julian. "They didn't see me before. I don't need them to see me now." But the institutional offers kept coming. Harvard called with an honorary doctorate. Yale offered an endowed chair. Columbia wanted her to lead their new Center for Language Access. Naomi turned them all down. "Why?" Julian asked. "Because those institutions have resources, prestige, access, and they still haven't figured out how to reach the people who need them most. I'm not interested in being their diversity trophy." Her eyes were bright with purpose. "I'm building something bigger. Something that belongs to everyone." The Global Education Access Initiative launched its beta platform 1 week later. Within 48 hours, 100,000 users. Within a month, 2 million. The app was downloaded in 127 countries. Letters poured in from learners in Manila, Nairobi, Sao Paulo, Mumbai. People who saw Naomi's story and understood that brilliance wasn't reserved for the privileged. It was for anyone hungry enough to claim it. 18 months later, the letter arrived in a pale blue envelope with Kenyan stamps. Naomi opened it at her desk, no longer just the librarian from the Bronx, but the executive director of the Global Education Access Initiative, a program that had reached 2.3 million learners across 47 countries. "Dear Mrs. Sterling, my name is Amara Achin. I am 16 years old and I live in Nairobi, Kenya. I used your platform to teach myself French. Every day after school, I would go to the internet cafe and study for 1 hour. All I could afford. It took me 11 months. Last week, I received a full scholarship to Sciences Po in Paris. I will be the first person in my family to attend university. The first to leave Kenya. The first to have a choice about my future. You showed me that where I come from doesn't define where I can go. You showed me that my mind is mine and no one can take that from me. Thank you for seeing people like me. Thank you for building something for us. With gratitude and hope, Amara." Naomi read it 3 times. Then she put her head down on her desk and cried. The kind of crying that comes from joy too big to contain, from purpose finally realized. Julian found her like that, tears streaming, the letter clutched in her hand. "Another one?" he asked gently. He'd seen her cry over these letters before. She received hundreds now, from all over the world, in dozens of languages. "A girl in Nairobi," Naomi whispered. "She's going to Paris." He kissed the top of her head. "Because of you. Because someone gave her access," Naomi corrected. "That's all any of us need." a chance. That Saturday, they returned to where it all began, the Bronx Community Library. The event was called Voices of the World, a multilingual literacy celebration. Children packed the reading room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, chattering in English and Spanish, Mandarin and Arabic, Haitian Creole and Bengali. The beautiful chaos of a neighborhood where borders meant nothing. Naomi sat in the center, surrounded by children who looked like her, who came from families like hers, who understood what it meant to be hungry for something the world said wasn't yours to have. Today, she said, I'm going to read you a story in 3 languages. And I want you to know something. Every language you speak is a superpower. Every language you learn makes you more yourself, not less. She read first in English, then Spanish, then Mandarin. The children followed along, some understanding all 3, some just one, but all of them transfixed by the possibility she represented. Julian watched from the back of the room, leaning against the same bookshelf where he'd first asked her why she worked there. Because I like books. And I like people who read them. He understood now. She didn't like books for their own sake. She liked them because they were bridges. Because they proved that distance, geographic, cultural, economic, could be crossed by anyone willing to learn. Naomi didn't think about the Gala anymore. Didn't think about Victoria or the champagne glass or the cruelty. Those people had faded into irrelevance. She thought instead about Amara in Nairobi, about the millions of learners logging in from internet cafes and borrowed phones and public libraries just like this one, about the world she was building where knowledge belonged to everyone, and dignity was a birthright, not a luxury. A little girl in the front row raised her hand. Miss Naomi, can you teach me French? Naomi smiled. Yes, sweetheart. I can teach you French. And when you learn it, you can teach someone else. Like you taught us. Exactly like that. Because that was the real legacy. Not the headlines or the viral videos or the humiliation of her enemies. The real legacy was this: a little girl in the Bronx learning French on a Saturday morning, believing, maybe for the first time, that the world was hers too.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you thought this story was intense, the next one is on a whole different level, wilder, intriguing, and even more addictive. Click the video on your screen right now and dive straight into it.